Most companies don't have a revenue problem. They have a structural integrity problem. I'm David Figueroa, president of Primetime Systems. This is the Revenue Integrity Gap, where executive leaders get honest about what's actually breaking underneath the growth. Let's get into it. If you're a CEO, president, or executive leader listening to this, you've probably already gotten the email. Maybe it was a board member, an investor, a chairman over dinner. And the sentence usually sounds something like this: we need to be using more AI. Sometimes it's softer. So tell me more about your AI strategy. Are we falling behind? I keep hearing from other portfolio companies that it's a real concern and the pressure is very real. In some cases, the board is genuinely ahead of the operator. But in many cases, the mandate is something else. It's a big box checked in a peer group. It's a phrase being repeated in a quarterly review because it's traveled from the last conference they attended. Now the executive on the receiving end has to decide fast whether to obey, push back, or do the harder thing. Today, we're going to talk about what that harder thing actually looks like. Let me say something extremely carefully and extremely clear, because it matters. I am not here to make the board the villain. In fact, most boards I work with are smart, experienced, and genuinely trying to do the right thing for the company or the business unit. Many times the boards are far ahead of the operator on AI. They've seen it in other portfolio companies, other business units. They've watched what's worked and what doesn't. And they're asking very real questions. But there's another version of this conversation. And every leader, executive leader, listening to this has lived through it. And it goes like this. A board member comes back from a conference, maybe even a peer dinner, perhaps a portfolio CEO breakfast. They've heard 3 other companies talk about their AI strategy. They think about it, and then they send you a message that distilled something like this: why aren't we talking about this? There's nothing wrong with that question. The problem is what happens next. Because the CEO usually doesn't say, well, great question. Let me explain to you how we're thinking about this. They say, you're right. We need to do more. And then they pull a leadership team together and ask, hey guys, what's our strategy? And the leadership tells them, who doesn't really have a clean answer, and they do the only thing they can do under pressure. They say, yeah, we have these pilots being deployed. Or worse yet, they start more pilots. Now that's not a strategy. That's an instruction to look busy. And the gap between a mandate and a model is where most companies are spending real money right now. On initiatives nobody owns. On goals who set. That will produce results that who is going to interpret. Why this particular conversation is so vulnerable and going off the rails? 3 simple things. First, AI is the first major technology wave where the board often hears about it before the operator does. Think about cloud. Think about mobile. Think about SaaS. In every previous wave, the operator was inside it before the board was talking about it in different meetings. AI has flipped that. Boards are talking about it constantly. Operators are still figuring out what it means for the actual business. So the directional pressure isn't operator to board the way it usually is. It's board to operator. And that creates a different dynamic where the conversation is happening before the diagnosis takes place. Second, there's really no shared definition of using AI. If a board member asks, are we cloud native? There's a real answer. You either are or you're not. There are clear stages. Now, if a board member asks, are we using AI? Well, what does that really mean? Does it mean, does every employee have Copilot? Does it mean you've deployed a customer-facing model? Does it mean you've trained your own data? Are you talking about cost savings or revenue lift, adoption or operationalization? None of these are the same question, and most board conversations don't distinguish between them, which means the CEO is being asked to commit to something that isn't clearly defined. The third thing, the peer group dynamics. Boards to other boards. Let's talk to other CEOs. And right now, everyone's comparing notes. Nobody wants to be the company that didn't see AI coming. which means the cost of looking absent is higher than the cost of looking unfocused. And the safest thing to do, and the politically safest thing to do, is to point at activity. Pilots, hackathons, a chief AI officer, a press release. These things make the discomfort go away. They don't make the company better, but they make the meeting easier. If you're a CEO, here's the trap. The three worst reflexes are pure compliance, pure resistance, or pure performance theater. Pure compliance? Yes, we'll use AI everywhere. Great, that's going to produce sprawl. Pure resistance? We don't need to be early. That produces a board crisis you didn't have to have. Pure performance theater, pilots and press releases. Now that burns trust the moment the board catches it. And I mean none of those are leadership. So what does the harder thing look like? It's a conversation, quite frankly. A short one that you initiate with your board before they initiate it with you, if it hasn't already happened. Here's the frame. Not, are we using AI? That's the wrong question. The right question is, what are we governing differently because of AI? Governing differently. Because the executive's job in this wave is not to deploy AI. It's to install governed execution and let AI operate inside of that. The reframe changes everything about how the board conversation goes. Instead of pointing to pilots, you point to decisions you're now making with more clarity, more data, and improved from last year. Instead of counting tools, you count operating gaps you've closed. Instead of bragging about adoption, you talk about operationalization, what's actually running, what's actually changing, and what it's actually costing. And here's what good looks like in that conversation. The board hears confidence, not because you have an AI strategy, but because you have an operating model that is AI related and AI is making sharper. They hear specifics, concrete examples of decisions you're making faster or better, not abstract claims about transformation. They hear governance because you're naming risk, not just benefits. They hear restraint because you're explaining what you're choosing not to do and why. That's what changes the mandate, not pushback, the reframe. You're not refusing to use AI. You're refusing to use it badly. And once the board hears that distinction, said with confidence and said with evidence, the conversation shifts. They stop asking you when you'll have an AI strategy, and they'll start asking you how they can support the operating model you're building. A mandate without a model isn't strategy. Your job is to install the model and let AI operate inside of it. If you're an executive leader listening today, here's the move. Before your next board meeting, not quarter, this week, write down 2 sentences. 1, what is your operating model becoming with AI inside of it? 2, what are you choosing not to do and why? If you can't write those sentences yet, you found your work. If you can, bring them to the board meeting. Let the conversation evolve. Don't wait for the email. Over the last 3 episodes, I've laid out 3 conditions I see every executive operating inside right now. AI sprawl, solving problems and creating new ones at the same speed. Behavioral blind spots, technology shaping the seller before the seller shapes the deal. Board mandates, pressure to act before the diagnosis exists. Those are conditions. Starting next week, we get into the work. 8 episodes, 8 executives, different seats, same diagnosis. A CEO who learned the hard way that growth itself can become the operating problem. A CFO who'll tell you why revenue performance doesn't actually predict enterprise value. A CRO unpacking why the best revenue organizations don't have pipeline problems, they have decision flow problems. And on through the season. The thesis is simple. Modern organizations don't fail because they lack data. They fail because systems don't align. Behaviors aren't understood. Governance breaks under scale. And AI accelerates decisions faster than the organizations can operationalize them. The companies that win in the next decade won't have the most data or the most tools. They'll have the clearest operational intelligence, the strongest governance, and the fastest aligned execution. That's the gap this show is about. Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Integrity Gap. If this hits home, share it with one executive in your network who needs to hear it. That's how this show grows. This episode is brought to you by Prime Time Systems, where we help revenue organizations close the gap between growth and governed execution. Find out more at prime-timesystems.com. I'm David Figueroa, and I'll see you next time.